You're listening to Art Affairs, episode number 4. Today I'll be talking to Jasper Wong. Alright, so my name's Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. If this is your first time listening, thanks a ton for tuning in. Art Affairs is meant to give you a look at and into the new contemporary art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, printmakers, shining a spotlight on the human side of the wonderful work they do. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, and you can check out new episodes on all your favorite podcast platforms. If you happen to be listening to this on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, I'd really be grateful if you took a moment to rate and review the show. It seriously helps quite a bit. And of course, if you like what I'm doing here, be sure to subscribe. And you can always connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is artist and entrepreneur Jasper Wong. Jasper is probably most well known, at least to the people listening to this show, as the founder of Powwow Worldwide, the street art convention that's held around the world. I actually met Jasper briefly when he was in town back in March of 2016 for Powwow South by Southwest. I believe that was the second year they had the event here in Austin, and unfortunately the last. So yeah, it was really great that he was able to come on the show. We talk about his early career, getting Powwow off the ground, expanding it worldwide, the changing perceptions of street art, and so much more. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Jasper Wong. Jasper, welcome to the show, man. I'm really glad to have you on. Thanks a ton for coming.
Well, thanks for having me.
Before we get into stuff that you're more well known for, I want to talk a bit about your background. I think there are aspects of that that are particularly interesting and really help to contextualize a lot of what you've done later in life. You grew up in Honolulu, where you live now, and you were raised by a single mother who raised you and 2 other kids. Having come from a single parent household myself, I'm sort of curious how your experience compares. Did you ever feel at any point that you had a difficult childhood or that you were disadvantaged in any way because of that?
I wouldn't say like sort of disadvantaged or difficult because my mom was present. She did work a lot to sort of raise the 3 of us. And so I spent a lot of time taking care of my youngest brother. So there's 3 of us total. I'm the oldest, and then the middle child, my brother's only a year and a half younger than I am, but my youngest brother is 7 years younger. So my dad left when I was 12, and so my youngest brother was only 5.
Okay.
So I took care of him a lot, like cooking dinners and picking him up from school and helping with his homework. When he was little, he used to think that I was his dad. Because my dad wasn't around. So, in that regard, I guess it was more difficult because you don't really expect that from a kid of my age at that time,
Sure.
And so I spent less time hanging out with friends and more time taking care of my little brother. But my mom was there often, and she was very supportive of everything that we were interested in. So then she knew that I was really interested in art, and so she tried to encourage that. So I wasn't pressured,
What sort of work did she do? Other than raising 3 kids, because certainly that's a full-time job.
She, at one point, she had a bakery.
Okay.
Yeah. So then that was a difficult business because she had to wake up early to deliver baked goods to hotels and different clients. And then, that's just hard in general. Then you're just trying to sell pastries.
And did you have much exposure to like the family business? Like, were you hanging around the shops as a kid, seeing more of the business side of things at all?
Yeah, yeah. My mom would make us work every chance she got. Yeah, so we had to be there, like selling pastries as well, or cleaning up, or putting bread out, or cutting bread, or running the register, and it's like we were all working there.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously, you didn't end up as a baker. You're not a baker now. So, at what point did you sort of recognize that you wanted to be an artist?
I think since I was little, like I think I was always really interested in comic books and cartoons growing up. It kind of informed a lot of my childhood. I spent a lot of time anticipating Saturday morning cartoons,
Mm.
and so it was something that I personally was always interested in, and something where I wanted to hopefully get into as a career. But I didn't know how to get there and what that meant, or how you could even make a living doing that. So when people would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would say cartoonist. More than anything else, I wouldn't say like astronaut or basketball player or anything. It would just always be cartoonist. And so since I was little, I would like even like draw little animated flip book cartoons in the corners of like my school books. And it was always like more anime inspired, like or video game inspired. So it was always like Ryu, like it was like Street Fighter and like Goku and Dragon Ball and stuff like that. Yeah,
Very cool. And was Hawaii a good place for somebody that had artistic aspirations? Was it an artist friendly environment?
it. I would say I lived in an artist friendly environment from my mother. I wouldn't say that there was tons of resources for young artists in Hawaii
Mm.
in general. Yeah, we don't have the largest creative community, artist community. Today there's a lot more, but when I was younger, like in the 80s, 90s, like it was lacking, I'd say. A lot of what happens in Hawaii is that there isn't like a lot of funds for the public school system, so they tend to cut them out of school curriculum when funding is tight. Even like my daughter's school, like my daughter's elementary school, um, they removed all the arts curriculum like last year,
Oh, wow.
so they have no arts curriculum. They can only get arts if they sign up for like after school classes, or if you find ways to sort of sign them up outside of that. So in that regard, like there wasn't like a ton of resources around for young artists. And even when I went to high school, I didn't even know that art colleges existed. So, and how to get into them. And so my college counselors in high school would direct me to schools that they thought had like a good design program. Which at the end I ended up going to a school that didn't have a good design program. Well, that's because there's like a lot of lack of knowledge on that front and then resources. Yeah. So I ended up finding out on my own and then getting into art college on my own. And I didn't have a portfolio or anything. I just kind of had to create one.
Just kind of had to figure it all out on your own. That must have been difficult. As far as like other kind of environmental things, did you have any exposure to street art? I mean, obviously it's a big part of your life now, but was street culture and street art something that you were exposed to as a kid?
Graffiti, yeah. And yeah, so definitely like graffiti. But beyond that, no. Uh,
You weren't in any like tagging crews or anything like that?
I mean, like I tagged around as a kid for fun. I was never like super serious about it. It was just more like I just thought it was cool. And then you would try to like draw different sort of like graffiti inspired art and things like in my sketchbooks. But I never like did anything on the wall till I was older.
Okay. And then ultimately, once you kind of got ready to go to college, right? You ended up moving to the States because, like you said, it didn't seem to be, it doesn't sound like it was the most conducive environment to help you grow in the way that you needed. So you ended up going to, I think, Portland first, and then ultimately ended up in San Francisco. Is that right?
Yeah, so I went to Lewis and Clark College, and I went there because, like as I said earlier, my college counselors in high school told me that that was a good school for design. And I went there, and within my first semester, my design teacher was having me teach classes, like Photoshop skills courses and stuff.
Oh, wow.
And then he was the one that told me that I wouldn't that I shouldn't be here, that I should go to an art school. And so I immediately started looking for schools in San Francisco. And I think that San Francisco just had that sort of reputation as like a city for the arts, and that was full of artists. It's not the case now, but it was then. Um, and so I started looking at all the schools there, and I was drawn to California College of the Arts and Crafts. And I went to visit the school and applied and created a portfolio by setting up like still life sort of setups and drawing them in my dorm room. And I applied and I got in. Uh, and then I moved. So after a semester of being in Lewis and Clark College, I was then going to California College of the Arts and Crafts.
Is that also where you started getting your stuff into galleries while you were going there?
Yeah, yeah. So midway through going to school there, they changed the name of the school. They removed the crafts part, so it just became California College of the Arts. But I started meeting like a lot of other young artists there, obviously, because it's art school, and different people would want to set up different art shows through like like if there was like an abandoned storefront or something, or people just had like little galleries, then that would just be a part of different group shows.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like a fairly traditional. Once you moved to the continental U.S., you started going to art college. Normally, the career path of a traditional artist after that wants to be in like a gallery would just continue exploring the gallery scene, building up bodies of work. But you sort of made a complete pivot and moved to Hong Kong, right, to learn manufacturing. Is that right? Like I'm sort of baffled by that. I mean, it obviously has worked out quite well, but that seems like a very unusual decision. Help me understand that a little bit. What motivated you to move to Hong Kong to learn manufacturing?
Yeah. So when I graduated from art college, I was confused as to what to do, and I think a lot of our kids that come out of there or come out of any sort of art college or with any sort of BFA, any sort of fine arts degree, like you're not sure what to do after college. I think a lot of the misperception of going to college is that you come out and you're already set and you jump into a career right away. And in most cases, that's not true. It's just sort of like what you think is going to happen or what you hope to happen. So then you leave college and you're like, under a mountain of debt from student loans. And even worse, if you're like an arts kid and you're like, I don't know what to do. And so when we were going to art college and I graduated with an illustrations degree, they told me that what my pretty much my career options were either being a editorial illustrator, so doing illustrations for different magazines, or doing children's books. It was kind of like the two things are like, okay, here's what you can do with this degree, and you're like, oh man, why'd you tell me earlier? Like I didn't know that's it. That was like all my options. and and then another thing was that like there wasn't really like a way to market yourself. So the preferred marketing method for like a lot of kids within that arena is to send out postcards.
Okay.
And so like you put your artwork on one side of the postcard and your information on the other side in hopes that an art director or an editor would then be drawn to it and hopefully hire you for a job.
Wow. So rather than an entire portfolio, you're having to fit everything that's important onto a postcard.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that was sort of like, marketing 101 back then. So in hopes that like, okay, they liked it, then maybe they'll be interested in seeing your entire portfolio or be interested in going to your website, right? But then if every single illustration major was doing that or beyond, then, like these guys must get inundated with postcards.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, there's no way for you to stand out in the crowd. And that's if you want to get into sort of like editorial illustrations. That's the thing that you want to do.
Right.
So it's just, it wasn't something like, it just became like, I knew that wasn't sort of what I wanted. And it seemed like really rough to sort of like get into that. And so I was really curious about how things were made because I was really curious about how to start my own business where I could do what I wanted to do. Because then, like, nowadays, like, there's a lot of resources for that. Like, if you wanted to, start a t-shirt brand or even like make shirts or anything or books, like, you could just easily do that. those things didn't exist back in like 2006 was when I graduated, and so I decided to move to Hong Kong to learn. Like if I wanted to make a book or a shoe or furniture or anything for that matter, like what was that process? Like how to get from point A to point B? Like if I had an idea to do something, like where would I go? And how would I get it done on my own rather than sort of like submitting it to some company in hopes that they'll take it on. Or so that was the thing was like I wanted to start my own company that could produce it myself.
Did you have anything specific in mind for manufacturing, or was it just the processes in general?
I think it started off just mainly as like apparel
Hmm.
because that just seemed like the easiest method, um, and then to go from there. So whether that be like apparel plus like cut and sew plus hopefully like shoes down the line or hats and everything like that. And so the goal was to try to do something like that. And I went up there. I just moved to Hong Kong. Like after having the idea, I moved to Hong Kong within like 3 or 4 months. I think it was a really like quick decision to just sort of do that. And I chose Hong Kong because China is one of the manufacturing capitals of the world, and Hong Kong in a lot of ways is a gateway to that because it was British territory for like 100 years. So it's like English speaking, but also I can speak Cantonese too, so I could easily survive out there. It's a starting point. So I moved out there, and to see, just out of just to try to meet people and see what could happen.
Yeah, just jump in.
Yeah,
um, so, I mean, you were still showing your work though. Like you were still creating art and you were still trying to put stuff into galleries, right?
yeah, yeah. So when I moved to Hong Kong, I was really interested in continuing having my work shown in different galleries, just because that was what I was doing a lot in San Francisco, and I kind of fell in love with that because being an artist can oftentimes be a very solitary pursuit. Like you're in your studio and you're painting and you're working, and then when you put it into a gallery show is when you're maybe first time showing off your work in person.
Sure.
Like I remember too, like this is we didn't have Instagram, all this kind of stuff yet, so people never was really sort of like that tied into what you were doing until they saw you and saw you at an opening and they saw your work in a gallery show, and that's how you would sort of spread your work out. Um, and I think it's still important to do that to this day because seeing a work in person versus like a photo of it is a totally different experience.
For sure, yeah.
Um, so I would really fell in love with that because it also helped to validate my work. Because I'm like, I might think it's good in my own head, but it's also do other people think it's good, or do you think the other work? It's like, am I doing like really bad work? Am I just like lost? So I really enjoyed doing that, and I started taking my portfolio around to different galleries in Hong Kong, and I kept getting rejected um, by like every gallery that I approached. And the reason why is because they told me that I was the wrong type of Chinese.
Interesting.
It's because I was American Chinese and not mainland Chinese, not Chinese from China. And so the reason why they said that is because Hong Kong's a very like finance based city. Like everything is informed by money. My grandmother would tell me that I wouldn't find a girlfriend until I made money. Like that was like the most important aspect of who I was as a person. For someone to love me was how much money I had, like that. But that's a very sort of like Chinese, like Hong Kong, like Macau sort of frame of mind. Is that money kind of is everything? Um, and so because they didn't see that like the work I was doing had potential to sell. At that time, like the hot commodity was mainland Chinese artists, and people were buying a lot of artists and investing in them for the fact that they were Chinese and and in hopes that they can then resell the work later and make a profit.
It was purely a money decision rather than
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So as a reaction to that, I started my own gallery.
above second, right?
Yeah, above Second. Yeah. So it was above Second Street in Sai Ying Pool, and we felt location was important because it was kind of like outside the main areas, and there wasn't like an easy way to get there. Like at that time, there was no train station that like got close enough. And then the ones that did get close enough, you'd either take a tram or a taxi or a minibus to where we were, or you walked. And so you really had to like want to go to a gallery to sort of be there. Like it wasn't just like, oh, I'm gonna go for a gallery walk, and then like you just happen upon the gallery like when you're out. Like it just that didn't exist. Like you'd have to really make your way out there. Like you have to really sort of try and go out of your way to come to us. Yeah, and so we started that gallery up. It was a restaurant that was abandoned for about 10 years, and so just put up some walls and windows and doors, and then you had a gallery. And the back half of it, or the back, I'll say quarter of it, was a studio.
Mm.
So even if so, there was less pressure to sort of sell artwork to keep the gallery alive because at the end, like the amount of rent that had to be paid, it was enough to like if I just used it to pay for the studio, then it was fine.
Okay. So I mean, that's not sort of a traditional approach to a gallery. It was almost like a WeWork type of space before WeWork, it sounds like, where you actually had people in residence working on stuff to show in the gallery. Was that sort of how it was set up?
Yeah. I mean, partially, yeah. So that we would have like artists come in, like in like sort of an artist in residence situation. They could like paint and do work there, ship some work there, and we'll do different shows. Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. Because I think a big part of it was just also sharing process. So a lot of times I felt that the process leading up to the final art is sometimes more interesting than the final art itself. And so if you can share that to the public, then I think it kind of helps to inform the work as well.
Interesting. And so that was also the venue, and I didn't even know this. I always assumed or thought that powwow originated in Hawaii, but it actually started above second in Hong Kong in 2010. That was the original venue for powwow. So did it look? It sounds like it probably looked quite a bit different. What was year one powwow like?
So that one, so first, like the name came from comic books. So pow being a a punch in the face. So that's how I felt that impact that art had on a viewer, and while being in reaction to that. But pow together was like a gathering to celebrate art, music, culture. It's a Native American term, and so that's what we were trying to do. So the idea was, hey, let's try to get different artists to the gallery, work with other galleries, because I had friends at Garage Works and different other venues, and see if we can pull them all together, art and music, to sort of create something new, something different in Hong Kong that wasn't centered around sort of finance and profits. And so I brought in artists like Will Barris from London, guys like Wu Ye from France, Jahan, Pat Lee, like just different artists from both Hong Kong and outside of that. And the idea was have everyone collaborate together and create and work together and share that process. So kind of have like an open studio situation, but also let's try to like destroy some of the artwork afterwards. So that it only became about, so that in hopes that with us not thinking about if we could sell the work, that perhaps if if the work wasn't sold, then we would be more experimental. We would take more risk. We would have more fun and kind of bring it back to when we were kids, where we like kind of created art for art's sake.
Interesting.
And so that was the whole goal of that project. And so it ended up working really well. We had a great turnout. We had like multiple shows. Everything did really well. And so then we're like, okay, then let's try to see if we can make it a traveling show and maybe take it to another city. Hawaii wasn't really like on my radar to take it there, but then I was convinced by friends in Hawaii to bring it back to my hometown. So we went from Hong Kong to Hawaii the following year.
Interesting. And was there a street art component to the original event, or was it?
No, there wasn't. I mean, there was a street art component in the fact that some of us did street art, but beyond that, no, it was all like sort of gallery based.
Okay.
It was all like on canvases. Like we didn't paint a wall or anything.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the logistics of the event now that it's in its ninth year, 10th year. How long in advance of the event do you start planning? It's sort of a big organizational feat, getting everything together. How early do you start planning these?
You normally like around like a year out or something. But then we do like 10 to 11 festivals a year. So, and like around like 17 different cities. Some happen every year, some happen like every other year. Some are one-offs. And so I feel like I'm constantly planning. Yeah, I'm always like involved in one of the festivals. Like sometimes like the festivals are more self-run and the teams can handle most of it, and where I kind of just help to oversee. Sometimes I'm like deep in helping to put them together.
Does that depend on the location? Are you more involved with like the Hawaii location versus some of the other international spots?
Yeah, I would say like Hawaii is probably one that I'm more involved in just because I'm based here. Because there's a lot of work that I can't do if I'm not there. Like it's hard for me to like secure walls and do different things and do community outreach work when I'm not based.
Yeah. What sort of process does it involve getting a wall secured, getting permission? Because obviously you have to get permission. Is it a conversation with like the municipality, with the business owners, some combination of those things? How do you end up getting that?
Every city is different. So the first step is to figure out and learn like what that city requires. Because some of them like they will need permissions from the city, and sometimes you might need like right away permissions because if you're using a sidewalk or if you're you know using or you're parking a left on the road, if it's in the way they need to know. In some other cities it's more lax and they don't require all that. Like you just would need permission from the property owners, from the business owners, and if they give the okay, then it's fine. So it depends. Each city's different. Yeah, we just have to like figure that out on like what is required. Because some cities are sometimes like Hawaii in particular is a little bit easier because they have outside outdoor advertising is illegal.
Mm,
So billboards or using walls to advertise anything is not legal here. So there's no, whereas like other cities, it's perfectly fine to do that. And so what happens is it's harder to find walls for murals because alternatively they could be making money by using the wall to put up an ad.
makes sense.
Yeah. So at times, so then when you approach people, they might be, oh, I can charge you this much money a month if you want to put a mural up. And that kind of like defeats it. It's like, well, one, we can't afford it, and two, like we don't want to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like Hawaii has just more blank canvases for you to work on because they're not advertising based.
Yeah, but the only thing is that there is at the same time there isn't like a lot of canvases because like we don't have a lot of space to sort of do murals because it's smaller. Yeah, it's a smaller city. And so, like, unless you're doing it in industrial districts, like, there's no appropriate walls for murals. And in certain districts, like Waikiki, you're not even allowed to do any murals at all, period.
Interesting.
Because they have, like, a strict sort of, like, special district design requirements. And so all the buildings have to be painted a certain shade of beige, and then you can't do any sort of, like, public art or anything out there. Yeah, so, it depends on where. Yeah. Even within that, like, even within one city, you have, like, multiple different sort of restrictions based on which district you're in.
So is that why you ultimately chose Kaka'ako, because it was more industrial based when you first started?
Yeah, so Kaka'ako, one is, yeah, because we had resources there and friends there that had spaces that they allowed us to use. And it was an industrial district that was between two major districts. It was between like downtown and Chinatown and between the major shopping districts like Ward and Ala Moana. And it was maybe like 5 minute drive away from Waikiki. So like location wise, it was ideal. And the fact that it was industrial also was ideal because you have like actual walls that you can paint on. Because it's like warehouses. It's not like walls with like windows and doors and different things. It's like, oh, they're just like big blank walls because it's a warehouse.
Makes sense. And as far as like recruiting artists and selecting artists to participate, do you have certain goals when it comes to choosing artists? Like some of them should be local or diverse artistic styles, cultural backgrounds, stuff like that?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, all those come into play. And one thing that we do try to make sure of is that at least half the roster or more is local.
Mm,
So, it's important to always involve the local community. So then whenever we're in Hawaii, yeah, half it's of artists from Hawaii. And if we're another city in Japan, then, half is Japanese artists or from Long Beach or from DC or from wherever. Like, and then we find that like sometimes when you see a project that's like just all visiting artists and they just come in and they leave, and we don't want to be perceived that way. We want to be perceived as a way to sort of add to their communities and be a part of what they have going on instead of like making them feel like we've just invaded a city and threw a bunch of artwork and then left. And it's also important that we as artists and as an organization connect with the local community, connect with local artists, and sort of build bridges between everyone, both between the artists and the visiting artists, also between us and the local community. And so that's why it's important to always have a team on the ground that is local, that knows it, that has ties to it, and that we can work with.
yeah, that's interesting. And you mentioned earlier community outreach. That's also become a big component of the powwow. What sort of programs do you have during the festival and even outside the festival for like community outreach?
So we do a number of different things. A big part is education. So we've started art schools and music schools and photography schools that are free for the youth within that community. It's all volunteer based, and so it's sort of a way to give back through through teaching, especially when you're in a city where like there's where the curriculum in the schools are being removed or it's lacking, like Hawaii. Uh, and another thing that we do is we started in Hawaii. We started like a creative community center. So we found a warehouse that we converted into like affordable studio spaces, and so that people can also share resources and facilities, and also use it as a place, as a venue for arts projects and art shows, etc. So we've been doing a lot of that as well. But then mostly like a lot of outreach comes from the schools, and also just like talking to people within the community, what the needs are, and trying to create artwork that kind of benefits them. So in a lot of ways, the public art and the murals help to support those communities because it brings people around. Like in Kaka'ako in particular, like no one spent any time there, like ever, growing up, unless you like went there for like a specific store. Like there was a store called Fisher's there that's still there now, and you would go there to like buy like all your back to school supplies. But that might be the only reason why you ever like spend any time there. Like, and so now that all the murals are there, in more recent years, it's become a tourist district where a lot of tourists and different people come to find the murals, take photos. And when people are walking around and creating foot traffic, one, it makes it safer because there's just more people around. And two, they discover local shops and restaurants. And it helps boost their business. And then beyond that, then it more businesses and restaurants want to open up because they're seeing that it's becoming, that there's more people around and that's viable for them to open up shops there. So we've seen that happen.
Are you seeing similar effects in other areas that you have this festival beyond Kaka'ako?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Yeah,
and it's interesting because like the purpose of powwow is sort of evolved. I mean, originally it was sort of just an excuse to get friends together and create amazing art. And now it's that plus this big community aspect where you're trying to improve the community around you and sort of bring people together. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I think originally like it was more, hey, let's back maybe like 10 years ago, it was more like artists were just interested in getting walls to paint on because it wasn't so easy getting walls like in any sort of city. Any sort of public artwork for like any sort of artist be like, hey, can I get a wall to paint a mural on? Was difficult thing to ask. Nowadays, like more people are like more open to it, but back then, like no one wanted to have artists paint on walls ever, and then, so then like a lot of it was more illegal, and then then a lot of artists would want to come on board because they just like wanted a wall to paint on, and then to have a wall in Hawaii was, especially like if we're painting it during the winter, like in February.
Yeah, it's a nice escape.
Yeah, it was it was no hard sell. Yeah.
For sure. Do you have artists that this is like their first time painting, and do you have any like way of coaching them and helping them learn it?
Yeah, so a lot of artists have done their first murals through us. So James Jean, people like James Jean did their first mural with us. People like Audrey Kawasaki did their first outdoor mural with us, and a lot of other artists have done their first murals with us. We've taught a lot of artists how to do murals, and that's huge for us. Like we love doing that. We love bringing on board artists that like have never done one before, and then helping guide them along the way to sort of do public artwork. So we've done that often, yeah, and we enjoy doing that.
Interesting. And sort of the ephemeral nature of street art in general. I think illegal street art tends to be more ephemeral, but your stuff's certainly more resilient because it is sanctioned and there's a certain amount of respect with the community. But it's still, there's things that are outside of your control. Buildings get torn down, stuff like that. How do you do any sort of documenting so that you can preserve the imagery so that even throughout time you still have the record?
Yeah, so we always hire sometimes some of the best videographers and photographers to document everything. We found that in the beginning that was really important to do that because not only do we want to have a record of everything, and also to have the artist will have a record and images of their own to use as well, but also it's important to have all that information as proofs of concept so that we can then use it to convince new cities of what we do, and also to raise funds. So since the beginning, since like year one, it's important to sort of like hire good documentation crews to make sure that everything is well documented.
What sort of funding is involved? Is it sponsorships usually, where companies will sponsor the event?
It depends on the city, but then every it's a variety of different things. Like we pretty much try to hit every avenue. It's everything from private and corporate sponsorships to writing grants, to trying to raise our own money through like maybe selling merchandise. We've done like crowdfunding, everything. Like we tried everything. The thing is with Powell is that it doesn't make money because it's all community beautification, all community engagement. It's all public art projects. So selling, we're not like selling tickets for people to look at murals. Like that just doesn't exist. And so every year we then like have to raise money again to make it happen. So I don't really like get paid. Sometimes if there's like extra money on the side, then we're like, okay, maybe we'll pay ourselves a little bit. But sometimes we just end up using that funds for like other projects. So Powwow has always been a passion project, and it still is in that regard. So I don't make money through it. But so yeah, that's just how it's been operating.
How do you select new cities? How do you get new cities on board, and how do you deal with the logistics of having not going to a place that you've never lived and working on these walls?
So that the first part of being able to do that is one, having a solid team that's on the ground. Just for the pure fact that I don't live there. Like I don't know how it works. Like in every city it has its own quirks and different ways of operating. And so once we have someone on the ground that has the capabilities to sort of pull it together, then that makes all the difference. So I always thought like the first steps really are, getting walls. Like, are there walls that are available for us to do murals on? Because if we can't get any walls, then like it's just not possible if we're going to do that type of project. And two, like, is there funding? Because we can't fund all of them because we don't make money. So then we can't cover all the costs for every single project globally. So it's important that there's funding sources, whether that be through the local government or other sources, and then we can then help try to like pull sponsorships to cover different cost items. But there needs to be X amount of dollars going in, because at the end of the day, it's like, if we don't have enough money, we can't make it happen. Like, who's going to be purchasing the lifts, supplies, etc. But then so it's important to have a ground team that understands that, and and then from there we can just sort of make it happen.
And with all these things that you have going on in your life, from a business perspective, how do you stay connected to your own art? And how do you still make time to create?
For a long time, I just didn't have time. Yeah, I would just be working. But these days, I've been getting more like commissioned work, and so I've been able to sort of do my own work through those commissions, or I've been asked to sort of like project manage, and then in those cases, they also want me to be an artist within that. So I've been able to work where it's like coming in through work. These days, I don't really spend a lot of time doing personal work, unfortunately.
Is that something you'd like to do more of?
I would, but it's just hard to, because I also have 2 kids and the family and everything.
Sure.
So it's just like to find time to paint for myself, it's difficult.
And as far as like the perceptions of street art, I feel like, certainly in the last few years, even earlier than that, but perceptions have shifted quite a lot, especially in the US, to where it's gone from this sort of underground illegal thing to something that's actually a viable form of art. What do you think has contributed to that change in perception? Obviously, Powwow's had a big hand in it, but what else?
I think it's just education, just changing misconceptions. Like when we first started, no one wanted us to do any work in their cities because they assumed that it would have a negative impact. They assumed that if we painted on walls, it would lead to more crime, or it will lead to more vandalism and it'll cause more issues. It was that broken glass theory, right? The broken window theory, where you have a broken window, then it leads to tagging, and it leads to graffiti, and then it leads to homelessness and more crime, etc. And that's sort of like a lot of people's mentality of an older generation. And so once we had the opportunities where people gave us a chance, they saw that it was the complete opposite. It actually improved and it added to a city, and it made it safer even, because then more people will come around. And so it's just like continuously sort of like trying to change people's conceptions of public art that that we just do, because a lot of times like cities have public art programs, but oftentimes those public art programs are very slow and they don't put out a lot of work just because there's a lot of bureaucratic sort of restrictions to sort of make something happen. Whereas like we just kind of come in and then we like will paint like 20 to like 80 murals in a week.
Right.
So like when we do it, it's like an overnight sort of like in 1 week it like changes completely. From like having no murals to like having a ton all in a one short time period.
With these sort of changing perceptions, do you find that this is actually like a viable career path for somebody that wants to be an artist now? I mean, you have some of these big guys like Shepard Fairey and Tristan Eaton that, you know, are they the exceptions, or is this actually a viable career path?
I think it very much is a viable career path. I think these days there's a lot more resources for artists to do what they want to do. Like there's so many more like career paths open for them. And there's so many more access to like if you wanted to make your own book, like you could. Like there's so many sort of you know online bookmakers and even like doing your own apparel where you don't even have to like deal with minimums, where they can just do it sort of direct to garments, like and they can do small runs. So I think there's definitely a lot of ways to also promote yourself, whether it be through social media or even people have their whole careers just doing videos on YouTube. So things have changed a lot. It's a matter of like how then like it's approached and how people are sort of, sorry, it's my daughter.
Sorry.
And how it's like sort of like it just there's just more resources, and I think it's totally viable. Whereas like when I graduated, there was like you could do postcards and then hopefully do editorial and children's books. And now it's like as an artist, like you don't have to just do illustration. You could also be a designer. You could do video. You could do public arts. You could make your own books, make your own comic books. And then all those things are right at your fingertips. So I don't think there's any excuse not to do it nowadays.
What would do you have any particular advice that you'd give artists who want to pursue this as a career?
I mean, if it's something that you love, like why not, right? Like if art is your passion, then why wouldn't you? Even for myself, like I was never like a festival organizer or an event organizer. I just didn't like to do it, and now I like to do it a lot. So it's something like anything is possible if you just try. If you just take those risks and try it out and see where it goes. And you never know where it'll take you. So and then that's always sort of like been my philosophy in my work, in my career. It's just I'll just try it and see what happens. Like I've tried to start a shoe company and then that failed, but I tried different things. So it's like it's not it's all kind of a learning process. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of are a rare breed, I think, in the artist community, in that you have a very strong entrepreneurial spirit and business acumen, as well as your creative side. Do you feel that sort of was ingrained in you from a childhood because of the businesses that your mother owned, the exposure to the business, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, and I would say so. Yeah, I think that influenced my work. Yeah, I think my whole family, like not only my mom, but like my grandfather and everyone else, were all entrepreneurs. So it's kind of like built in. It was just a matter of like, how do you then sort of take that into something that you're interested in? Because I wasn't going to start a bakery or anything like that. So it was trying to like, okay, I'm interested in this, and what can I do to sort of build that? I think that's what initially started my whole journey to Hong Kong, was that I was interested in how to start my own business doing this kind of work rather than trying to like go to an existing brand and be like, hey, I want to do this. Like, would you want to hire me to do this? Rather than, and my thought process was, hey, I want to do this. Why don't I start my own company doing this?
And you mentioned clothing. One of the ventures that you and your wife have are Big Bad Wolf. Tell me a little bit about that. What was the impetus for that project?
That really came from like having our first child. Like we found that when we had her, that a lot of the clothing that we would then buy, or people would buy for her, was very sort of like gender based. Like girls wore this, boys wore this. And it still is to this day. Like whenever you go shopping, it's like, hey, here's the boys' clothes and here's the girls' clothes. And also, there wasn't anything that we liked. We didn't like really enjoy any of the work that was being put out, like all the stuff that when you go to Target and everything like that, we didn't find it to be something that we wanted to purchase and spend money on. So we would have loved to see some of our friends' artwork on clothing for kids.
Right.
So we just started doing that.
And you have a brick and mortar shop too, right? In Honolulu?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where's that at?
That's at South Shore Market on like near Ward Avenue on Hawaii. It's like it's really close to all the murals. Actually, it is in the same district as where all the murals are.
Very cool. That's awesome. And then Powwow is approaching its 11th year, right? I mean, 11th if you include Hong Kong as year one, 10th year in Hawaii. So what do you have lined up for February that you can share with us?
I always tell people, I was like, what would make it special is if it was like where I'm not like stressing out about it and it was like easy and I didn't have to like worry about all this stuff. Like that to me is like, oh, that'd be a special one. Like I didn't stress out so much. I was like pretty relaxed through the whole thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. Any new artists coming on that have never been before?
Yeah, we do. We have a few new artists that are coming on board. People like Hush and Alex Pardee, which who we haven't worked with in the past. And so, but then really it's like the Hawaii one, it's like we're just trying to keep it going, you know. So, and it's always really hard to sort of like make certain, like, trying to do a concert every year is really tough because the cost of a concert and trying to find something to do it and trying to make it happen, it's not an easy thing. And so we don't, it's always like if we can make it happen or not. It's a kind of hit or miss. Um, but otherwise, like we are doing a bunch of new murals again and doing a bunch of events throughout the week. And then plus, like we do so many festivals. And people are like, oh, is it getting bigger? I'm like, we do like 10 to 11 a year. Like in terms of like global expansion, like we do so many and we work across 17 cities and doing even more than that in the future. It's like, I don't like maybe like the Hawaii one isn't like growing scale wise, but as an organization, we've grown a lot.
Well, and at some point you're going to run out of walls to paint on in Hawaii.
Yeah, I mean, we do around like 70 to 80 a year, so it's like a lot in like a week. Like it's just that's a lot of murals to do in a week, regardless.
Are there any new cities coming on board in like 2020 that you haven't had?
Yeah, so we're working on Singapore and Cleveland and San Francisco.
Very cool. Okay, so we're right at the end now. One last question for you, and something I want to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
I don't know. I mean, I know so many artists, so I don't. So who would make an interesting person to talk to? Because I think like there's a lot of artists that like they get interviewed a lot. People like Shepard and people like Tristan and people like James. Like they're well known enough where you can find interviews about them without an issue. Um, Whereas like there's some up and coming guys or some guys that have like interesting stories that should be shared too. People like Eclipse, like Casey.
Okay.
He's one of the guys that started MSK and Seventh Letter and Known Gallery, and he spent his career building up artists, supporting artists, and he's a painter himself, but he does a lot less of it now. And I've been trying to push him to like sort of join us as an artist, but he's always more interested in like bringing other artists on board. Um, so I think Casey Sultan Eclipse is great. And even people like Matt Eaton, Tristan's brother, who used to run like Library Street Collective, but he's also an artist too. Like they're kind of like in the same vein as me, where we're also artists and we started off as artists, but then we've kind of fell into this world where we're like supporting a lot of artists and doing different projects. So guys like Matt and Casey are kind of like within that vein.
Yeah, you need people like that, man. I mean, it's important to lift your fellow artists up, and I think your entire career has sort of demonstrated that, which is impressive.
I think that's kind of what sets our organization apart. Is that it's a lot of us are like it's like run by artists, so we kind of like know what is needed. Like I've painted large scale murals, and so I know kind of like what is needed to sort of do it, and so I want to try to provide that to the artists too, so that it's like easier. So, but also like I know like when you're like over ordering paint, or if we're like, oh, I need this. I'm like, no, you don't actually need that. Like you can do it without that. I can paint that. It's like, oh, it's not taking this. I'm like, this shouldn't take you that long to do that because I could paint that like much quicker. So it helps to sort of like have those kind of skill sets too, because you kind of like understand what is needed and what isn't needed. But yeah, so But yeah, I think those guys would be great because I think they have an interesting story too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jasper, for joining me today. You've had such an impressive career that I think is made more impressive by the fact that it's really built on uplifting a community, and I think that's amazing. And I think we could all learn from that. So I'm excited to see where you go from here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jasper. I'm so impressed by all that Jasper has managed to accomplish throughout the course of his career, but even more so by the fact that most of his successes, and certainly his biggest ones, were those that focused on the community, building up his fellow artists, giving them a platform to not only showcase their work on the world stage, but also make real and meaningful change in the local communities that they visit. That community spirit is something we could all use a little more of, no doubt. And during the interview, I observed that powwow has sort of evolved in purpose over the years, that it changed from being an excuse to bring friends together to create art in Hong Kong to being more about helping out communities. But thinking about it more, that's sort of the surface level evolution, but the core of it, the real core sort of principle of it, hasn't actually changed. The common thread throughout all of the powwow events, even back in year one, it wasn't street art and it wasn't Hawaii. The constant that's been at the core of every single powwow event is that recognition that when you bring people together, you can do incredible things. Sure, you can make incredible art, but you can also transform an entire community. It's this idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And when we set aside our differences, or better yet, embrace them, and work together towards a common goal, we can do pretty amazing things. That was my takeaway, from talking to Jasper. Let me know what your takeaways were and what you thought of our conversation. So big thanks to Jasper for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. Your support genuinely means the world to me. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any suggestions for the show, or if there's a guest you want me to try and have on. Also, if you have any questions you'd like me to ask future guests, send those over too. I'd love to hear any feedback you might have for me. You can contact me through my website at artaffairespodcast.com. And like I said at the front of the show, you can go there to check out any previous episodes. You can also find the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. And last but not least, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, I'd be super grateful if you took a moment to rate and review the show. I can't tell you how much that actually helps. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.